Hi, this is your Native American Studies professor again, Sintra Agee, and welcome. So this is a closer introduction of myself and where I am placed, and we're going to be using the multiple meanings of the word place. So what I'm doing here is emulating what I've seen many Native people do when they introduce themselves to an audience or when they're speaking publicly. I hope when what they do is they place themselves. So I hope what I'm doing isn't cultural appropriation. I hope it is modeling and following a good way of being in the world, a good way of relating, and that Native people have taught me. This emulation that I'm making, this following of the way Native speakers or speakers who are Native, emulating this way of introducing yourself is, it's not necessarily a religious act, although, which is never okay to appropriate Native religions. But at the same time, we really need to know and understand that the spiritual and the physical worlds are never far apart in almost all indigenous cultures. So the first meaning of place, right, is geography. All right, that's what we sort of think of, right? And when we think of place. So I am placed in Lolita, which is squarely on the unceded lands of the Wiyot Nation. This is, as I said in my quick intro video on the homepage, this is called a land acknowledgement, and I'd like to define what unceded means, and it's spelled UNCEDED, and it means that no person, no government, no representative of the Wiyot Nation ever gave up these lands. They never sold them. They never ceded them. Again, CEDED, because they definitely ceded, SEED, ED. They definitely did not just live in a wilderness. You know, they, and as we'll be going into over the semester, they managed their ecosystems, but they worked with the ecosystem in opposition, which is very much different from the way Westernized cultures have done it. So that's called a land acknowledgement. And the second meaning of place is where you are within your family, right? And it's not just your human family, but your non-human family as well. And that includes other species, the rest of the ecosystem, the ecosystems at multiple scales, all the way up to and beyond, probably, certainly, to the planetary level, right? It's all an interconnected system, and we are a part of that. Where I am within my family's generational lines is 100% colonial. I'm not Native. All the families from which I am descended were invaded and occupied, as in a military occupation, like the way that Israel has a military occupation of Palestine. They were all here by the late 1600s. So I'm going to start with my mother's line. Yeah. And momentito, abuelita, Lo siento, pero es verdad. What I said was just a minute um, to my grandmother, saying that I'm sorry, but what I'm about to say is true. So, what she would say is sort of a perfect encapsulation of the relationship between Spanish folks to this day with the rest of Mexico, Central America, and South America, and here, who, by the way, are not by the way, but who are indigenous people, right? We don't tend to think of folks within Mexico and Latin America and South America as indigenous. And they're, like most of us, there are varying degrees of mixed race, and we will be, later in the semester, getting right into deconstructing this idea of race. But what my grandmother would say is proudly, not one drop of Indian blood, right? So that's a really good crystallization of what we're talking about here. My mother's line was granted a huge amount of land in the Yucatan in southern Mexico by the King and Queen of Spain in the late 1500s. My mother, about 15 or 20 years ago, successfully gave back all of those lands. So that's my mother's line. Now, my mother's father's line was English, and they invaded Massachusetts in the late 1600s. And they were, like most of the English invaders at that time, religious fanatics. I mean, they were very, very religious people. And they were missionaries, ministers, and teachers. So there's that. And then, so let's go to my father's mother's line, which also invaded Massachusetts in the late 1600s. And were, it was various different professions, but again, most of these folks were highly religious and considered themselves religious refugees. So they went from being persecuted to persecuting. Okay, so we now turn to my father's line. And the first AG to come to these lands was Mathieu Ager. He was a French Huguenot, and a Huguenot is a French Protestant. We need to remember that at this time, Europe is embroiled for hundreds of years within really violent and bloody religious struggles, between religious wars between Protestants and Catholics, and we need only think of the Spanish Inquisition to understand that fact. So Mathieu Ager was from a noble family in France. He was a second son, which means he wouldn't have inherited anything substantial. So he came here to make his fortune. And he owned plantations. He and his descendants owned plantations, first in Virginia, and then on to Tennessee. We held a lot of slaves. So there are a lot of black AGs. This was something that a lot of enslaved folks did, was they took their owner's last name. So, it's just rough, right? So this is what brings me to Native American studies, right? I remember from a very young age, when I first started to hear about my family and about what went down here, about the genocide, I remember feeling, I was floored. I was completely shocked. And I said, wait a minute. We're not going one step further until we address this. I mean, as if I'm just supposed to walk by it, right? I was born into a lot of money. I was born into a lot of elitism. And I understood that just was not okay because of where that wealth and power came from. Okay. So I want to go back now to the geographical idea of place, right? So when we place ourselves, right, another meaning of that word place is to connect with a place, right? And one of the central features of almost all indigenous cultures is this deep and abiding commitment and relation to and respect for and responsibility for a place, a geographic place, the place from which they come, the place where they were born, the place their tribal culture belongs, and the place that their culture belongs to. So when we connect with a place, with land, with nature, we see that humans live in relationship with everyone and everything, right? It's not just to humans, but it's to all non-humans as well. And that's other species. Let's remember that we are a species within an ecosystem. So it's a relationship to other species, to that ecosystem, and depending on your religious beliefs, to a lot of non-human spiritual entities. So one of the defining features that we see across Native American cultures, across indigenous cultures, and by the way, we'll be getting to why Native American is not exactly the, it's not the term, right? We'll get into that later, and you can kind of guess why Native folks do not want to necessarily be associated with the American project. It's a way of erasing their tribal citizenship, their tribal nations into the American empire. Anyway, okay. So one of the defining features of most indigenous cultures is a huge amount of principles, teachings, practices that remind and reconnect people to central principles and central ways of acting that recognize relationship and are reciprocal with it, right? And reciprocity is about a balanced give and take, right? If something is given, something is given back, right? So this is what Western science calls ecology, right? So it's not some pie in the sky idea. It's quite literally what's happening. Just observe and you'll see it. So Native cultures, in their languages, the way what we call ecology is expressed is, there's many ways, but one of the ways that it's done is words in indigenous languages that are translated to everything is connected, everything is related, or in a more exact relationship, or a more exact translation often is to all our relations. Okay. And again, this is a relationship with not just humans, but non-humans, and the wider natural world, right? Let's remember, humans are natural, right? We, within Western culture, there is this dualism, this separation, this idea of there's humans and then there's nature, right? And as if humans weren't natural. And this, I feel, is absolutely central to the problems we're having. And I call it the great amputation, right? The great amputation of humans from the rest of their relations, from the rest of the world. So we, another thing I want to say is, before I go, for now, is, again, to stress that this relationship, this living in relation, is to the physical world, is very much a spiritual matter as well. The sacred and the secular are never far apart, as I was saying before. They are one thing. And though I'm going to reference a fabulous book, I highly recommend it, whose title is We Become a Part of It. So one of the central things in a lot of Native cultures and a lot of Native spiritualities, religions rather, is to rebind oneself and one's family and one's nation to their place, right? And that is a good way of being in the world. Okay, well, goodbye for now. Thanks for listening. Please read every part of this Welcome and Orientation module. And then the first weekly module, which is, again, explained in this orientation module, the first weekly module will be posted on Monday and is due September 4th. Okay, so that everything, I've done my best to explain everything within this module and within this syllabus, but please don't hesitate to ask me any kind of question, any comments, any concerns. That is literally what I'm here for. Also, I will be checking in with you guys regularly throughout the semester, so don't feel like, oh, what have I done wrong? I've got an email from my professor. No. It's just me making sure that you have what you need. Okay, so thank you, and bye.